Hello everyone. If you love heartwarming animal stories and want to follow the inspiring journey of these adorable friends, don't forget to hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss any of our videos. Now, let's dive into today's emotional story. Ethan had never known what it was like to see the world with his own eyes. Born blind, he had learned to navigate the world through sound, touch, and the guidance of his faithful service dog, Bolt. Bolt wasn't just a dog to Ethan, he was his lifeline, his protector, and his best friend. The bond they shared was deeper than words could describe. The duo had been inseparable since Ethan was a toddler, and Bolt, a Labrador retriever, had been specially trained to assist Ethan in his daily tasks, from crossing busy streets to helping him pick up items that had fallen on the floor. Ethan's family, especially his mother, Sarah, was incredibly grateful for Bolt's presence in their lives. He allowed Ethan to experience a sense of freedom that would have been impossible without his canine companion. They could go for walks in the park, visit the local store, or simply enjoy the warm sunshine without the constant fear of obstacles that Ethan could not see. But no matter how independent Ethan had become, there was one thing Sarah worried about: Ethan's safety. She knew that the world could be a dangerous place, and even with Bolt by his side, there were times when the uncertainty of the unknown made her nervous. One late morning, as Sarah and Ethan walked together through the park near their home, she couldn't help but notice how calm and assured Bolt was. Ethan walked confidently, guided by Bolt's gentle pulls, navigating the path without hesitation. They had just reached a crosswalk when something strange happened. Bolt, who was usually so calm and obedient, suddenly tugged Ethan toward the opposite direction. "Come on, boy, what is it?" Sarah said gently, pulling on the leash to stop him. "This way, Bolt." But Bolt wasn't budging. He tugged harder, his tail stiff and ears alert as if sensing something. Sarah looked at him, confused. She had never seen him act this way before. Normally, Bolt was incredibly well-trained and would only lead Ethan in the direction of safety. This strange behavior made Sarah uneasy. "Ethan, wait here," Sarah said, her voice a bit shaky. "Bolt is acting weird." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his hand still resting gently on Bolt's back. "What's wrong with him, Mom?" Sarah hesitated. "I don't know, honey. Maybe he's just confused today. But let's stay put for a moment. Something doesn't feel right." As they stood there, Bolt's body trembled slightly, his gaze fixed ahead, watching the flow of cars. Sarah had no idea what was going on, but she trusted Bolt with her son's life. For the past 5 years, he had kept Ethan safe, and she had to believe that this was no different. Yet, the odd feeling of unease that settled in her chest wouldn't go away. "Why don't we just take a seat on the bench for a moment?" Sarah suggested, trying to calm both herself and Ethan. "Maybe Bolt needs a rest." They made their way to the nearby bench. As they sat down, Sarah tried to calm her racing thoughts. Why was Bolt acting so strangely? They had crossed this very same street 100 times, with no problems. It was just a regular day. But somehow, her instincts told her that something wasn't right. Her attention returned to Bolt, who was now sitting down, still alert, his eyes locked onto the busy street, but his focus unwavering. Suddenly, a car sped by, too fast for Sarah's liking. It was an SUV, weaving in and out of traffic. She frowned, and for a moment, she thought she saw Bolt's body stiffen as he stood up, ready to go. But just as quickly as the car passed, it was gone from sight, and she realized she'd let her guard down. All right, Bolt. Good boy, Sarah said, trying to calm both the dog and herself. She rose from the bench, and just as they began to make their way toward the crosswalk again, Bolt's actions took a dramatic turn. Without warning, he yanked Ethan away from the street, pulling him back toward the sidewalk. Ethan, startled, tried to follow, but Bolt was determined, stronger than he had ever been. He growled low in his throat and refused to move another step forward. This was unlike any behavior she had seen before. What's going on, Bolt? Sarah asked, now more concerned than ever. As she stood there, looking over her shoulder, Sarah noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. The light at the crosswalk had changed, and a truck, going much too fast, was heading directly for the intersection. The truck wasn't stopping for the red light. It was speeding through. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the panic setting in. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized that Bolt had not been trying to pull Ethan away from the street for no reason. The dog had sensed the danger. He had sensed the truck coming. Thank you, Bolt, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. She looked at Ethan, who was oblivious to the danger they had narrowly avoided. Thank you. As Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, she felt a wave of gratitude flood over her. Bolt had saved them. He had saved Ethan from stepping right into the path of an oncoming truck that was barreling through the intersection without slowing down. Had it not been for his heightened senses and instincts, the consequences would have been disastrous. That was close, Bolt, Sarah murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached out to stroke the dog's back, her hands trembling slightly as she did so. Bolt stood firm, his head still turned toward the street, watching the traffic warily. His eyes remained focused, alert as if the danger had not yet passed. Ethan, who was now completely unaware of how narrowly they had escaped harm, turned toward his mom with a curious look. Why did Bolt pull me like that, Mom? He asked innocently, his tiny hand still resting on the dog's back. Sarah swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. She knelt down beside her son, wrapping her arms around him and pulling him into a tight embrace. Because, my love, she said, her voice soft but firm, Bolt is our protector. He kept you safe, even when I didn't see what was coming. Ethan smiled up at her, his face filled with the innocence only a young child could have. He had no idea just how close they had come to losing everything. For him, it was just another day with his beloved dog by his side. Good boy, Bolt, Sarah whispered, her eyes glistening with tears as she kissed Ethan's forehead. As they made their way back home, Sarah's mind raced. How had she not noticed the truck? How had she let her guard down for even a moment? And yet, there had been Bolt, always by her side, always keeping watch. Later that evening, as the family sat down to dinner, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Bolt had always been a great dog, loving, loyal, and playful, but now, she saw him in a new light. He wasn't just a pet, he was a guardian, a lifesaver, a hero. The bond between them, already strong, had deepened beyond anything she had ever imagined. That night, as Ethan and Sarah sat together, watching TV, Bolt lay at their feet, his head resting on his paws. He was calm, but Sarah knew he was still alert. His watchful eyes never strayed far from the door, and she could almost sense that he was still on guard, even though the immediate danger had passed. In that moment, she realized that Bolt's role in their lives was far more than just providing companionship for Ethan. He was there to protect, to serve, and to keep them safe. Good boy, Bolt, Sarah said again, her voice thick with emotion. She reached down and patted his head gently, her hand lingering in his soft fur. Ethan, noticing the way his mother spoke to Bolt, looked up at her with a serious expression. Why do you call him good boy all the time, Mom? Sarah smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. Because he is, sweetheart. He's the best dog anyone could ever ask for. He saved your life today. He's not just a pet. He's part of our family, and we're lucky to have him. Ethan nodded solemnly, as though he understood the gravity of the situation, even if he couldn't fully comprehend it. He leaned down and gave Bolt a hug, his small arms wrapping around the dog's neck. Bolt, sensing his affection, leaned into the embrace, his tail thumping softly against the floor. As the days passed, Sarah found herself reflecting more and more on the importance of the bond she shared with Bolt. She had always known that Ethan's connection with the dog was special, but she hadn't fully appreciated the depth of that relationship until now. Bolt was not just a guide dog, he was an intuitive and loving companion, always alert, always protective. Sarah had seen firsthand how he had saved Ethan from harm, and she couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the dog who had, quite literally, watched over her son. One afternoon, as Sarah sat on the porch, watching Ethan and Bolt play in the yard, she realized that her family had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. They had all grown closer. The bond they shared with Bolt had brought them all together, united by a common love and respect for the dog who had saved their lives. In that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what happened in the future, they would always have each other. And they would always have Bolt. Weeks passed, and life began to settle back into a comfortable routine. Ethan continued his therapy, his progress steady, and Sarah found herself growing more confident in her role as a mother and caretaker. But every day, there was one constant: Bolt. The dog had not only become a part of their family, but it was as if he had embedded himself into the very fabric of their lives. His presence was as integral as the air they breathed, and Sarah often found herself marveling at his intelligence and unwavering loyalty. One afternoon, Sarah was preparing dinner while Ethan and Bolt played outside. The sound of laughter and the rhythmic thump of Bolt's tail were a familiar and comforting backdrop. Ethan was riding his bike in the yard, his eyes bright with excitement, while Bolt trotted behind him, keeping pace with the child's every move. But then, out of nowhere, the sharp, jarring sound of screeching tires shattered the peaceful afternoon. Sarah froze, her heart leaping into her throat. It was followed by the unmistakable sound of a crash, a loud thud that reverberated through the house. Her instincts screamed, and without thinking, she dashed out the door. "Ethan! Bolt!" she shouted, her voice thick with panic. As she rounded the corner of the house, she saw the most horrifying sight: a car had careened off the road and crashed into their fence, just a few feet away from where Ethan and Bolt had been playing. Ethan was on the ground, his bike twisted beneath him, but Bolt was already there, standing protectively over him. His ears were pinned back, his tail was stiff, and he was growling fiercely at the car that had come so close to the family. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Sarah's breath caught in her chest as she ran toward Ethan, heart pounding. She knelt beside him, panic coursing through her veins. "Ethan, are you okay? Please, talk to me," she pleaded, her hands trembling as she checked him for any injuries. Ethan, dazed but unharmed, nodded. "I'm okay, Mom. Bolt kept me safe." Sarah glanced at Bolt, who was still standing by Ethan, keeping a watchful eye on the car. The driver, a young man who appeared disoriented, stumbled out of the wreckage. He was shaking, but he seemed unharmed. He took one look at Sarah and immediately dropped to his knees in apology. "I'm so sorry. I lost control of the wheel, and I didn't mean to." His voice cracked, but Sarah barely heard him. Her focus was entirely on Ethan and the dog. "Bolt saved him," Sarah whispered, almost to herself. It wasn't just the obvious protection that Bolt had given her son, it was the dog's instincts, his immediate decision to stand guard. He had acted without hesitation, and in doing so, had prevented what could have been a devastating accident. She hugged Ethan tightly, her heart still racing, as Bolt padded over and nudged her with his nose. Sarah bent down, her arms wrapping around him as she buried her face in his fur. "You are our hero, Bolt," she whispered through tears. The rest of the evening was a blur of phone calls, ambulances, the police, and neighbors gathering to make sure everyone was okay. The driver of the car, a local college student, was shaken up, but he was otherwise unharmed. The crash was an unfortunate accident, caused by a mechanical failure in the car. But the most important thing was that Ethan had escaped unharmed, and that Bolt had, once again, proven to be their protector. As the sun began to set, Sarah stood on the porch, watching the scene unfold. Ethan was sitting on the steps, laughing with his friends, his bike set aside and forgotten. Bolt was by his side, his head resting on Ethan's lap as they both gazed at the stars. It was a peaceful moment, but Sarah knew that the reality of the day's events would stay with her forever. She walked over and sat beside Ethan, looking down at Bolt. "He's more than just a dog," Sarah said softly, as if speaking to herself. "He's a protector, a guardian angel in fur." Ethan nodded, his gaze never leaving Bolt. "He's my best friend, Mom. I think he always will be." The words struck a chord in Sarah's heart. They had always known that Bolt was special, but it wasn't until moments like these that they truly understood the depth of the bond between a dog and his family. Bolt had not only saved Ethan's life, but he had also become a symbol of loyalty, bravery, and love, qualities that were sometimes hard to find in the human world. As the night fell and the world around them grew quieter, Sarah leaned back, her arms around her son and their faithful dog by their side. It was a quiet kind of happiness, a peace that came from knowing that no matter what, they were safe together, always. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal, though Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of what had happened. The near accident still haunted her, the image of the car careening toward Ethan flashing through her mind at unexpected moments. But every time that fear crept in, she looked at Bolt, and it was as though a calming wave washed over her. The bond between them had grown deeper in the aftermath of that night, and she was more grateful than ever for the little dog who had become a part of their family. One afternoon, Sarah decided to take Bolt for a walk. Ethan was at school, and it was a rare moment of quiet. The streets were lined with tall oak trees, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. It was peaceful, the sun casting golden hues across the path. But as Sarah strolled down the familiar block, her mind began to race with all the tasks she needed to complete at home: laundry, dishes, and the pile of work she had been putting off. She barely noticed when the weather began to change. Without warning, the sky darkened, and the wind picked up, turning the peaceful afternoon into something more ominous. Sarah glanced up, a flash of unease crossing her face. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and then the rain began to pour in heavy sheets, soaking her within seconds. She didn't mind the rain. In fact, there was something cleansing about it. But as the wind howled and the storm worsened, Sarah's concern shifted to Ethan. Was he okay? Had he made it home from school safely? Come on, Bolt, she muttered, pulling the leash a bit tighter as the storm raged around them. Bolt was trotting confidently at her side, his fur slick with rain, but his eyes were alert, constantly scanning the road. He had always been perceptive, especially in times of distress, and today was no different. Suddenly, Bolt stopped in his tracks, his ears perked and his body tense. Sarah froze, looking around, but she saw nothing. Her heart skipped a beat as Bolt growled low in his throat, his eyes fixed on something just up ahead. Before Sarah could react, she heard the unmistakable sound of tires skidding on wet pavement. A car, going too fast, came around the corner, out of control. It veered directly toward them, splashing through the puddles, its headlights blinding in the rain. The storm had made the streets slippery, and in that moment, it felt as if time stood still. "Bolt, move!" Sarah shouted, tugging the leash, but the dog didn't budge. His body was firmly planted, his growl deepening as the car hurtled toward them. Bolt was facing the oncoming vehicle, fully aware of the danger. There was no time to think, only to act. Without warning, Bolt sprang forward, pulling Sarah out of the path of the car just as it skidded by. In that moment, Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. Bolt's incredible instinct had saved them both. The car sped past them, its tires screeching on the wet road as it continued down the street, but Sarah and Bolt were safe, their hearts racing from the near miss. Sarah stood there, still catching her breath, feeling the shock pulse through her body. She looked down at Bolt, whose fur was matted with rain but whose eyes shone with quiet determination. He had acted without hesitation, guided by an instinct that Sarah would never fully understand but would always appreciate. "Good boy, Bolt," she whispered, kneeling down and hugging him tightly. "You're a hero." In that moment, Sarah understood the depth of the bond between them. It wasn't just about Bolt being a good dog, it was about his loyalty, his ability to sense danger and protect those he loved. Sarah had always known that Bolt was more than just a pet, but now she knew, without a doubt, that he was a guardian, an unseen hero who would do anything to keep them safe. That night, as Sarah sat with Ethan and Bolt, the weight of the events of the day slowly began to settle. She had seen the storm, the fear, and the chaos, but she had also witnessed something beautiful: an unwavering bond, a love that didn't need words, and a dog who understood her family better than anyone else ever could. Later, as the house grew quieter and the storm passed, Sarah and Ethan sat by the window, watching the rain fade into the night. Bolt lay at their feet, content and exhausted, his head resting peacefully on the floor. Sarah smiled down at him, grateful for every moment, every little sign that he was always there, ready to protect them, no matter the cost. "Thank you, Bolt," Sarah whispered, her voice full of emotion. The storm had passed, but the peace that followed would last forever. And as long as they had each other, there was no storm they couldn't weather. The story of Ethan and Bolt teaches us the profound importance of trust and the bond between humans and animals. Bolt, the guide dog, saved Ethan's life by leading him to safety when a dangerous situation arose, demonstrating that sometimes our pets see things we cannot. This story shows that the seemingly silent, everyday acts of care and loyalty from our pets can have life-changing impacts. Bolt's instincts to protect Ethan were more than just a response to training, they were a result of his deep, unspoken connection to Ethan. This lesson can be applied to real life, where many individuals rely on the care, support, and love of animals, whether they're service animals or beloved pets. Dogs, for instance, are often able to detect danger, provide emotional support, and guide those in need, giving them a sense of security that humans may not always be able to offer. The story reinforces the idea that compassion, loyalty, and understanding transcend communication barriers, showing us that the quiet, steadfast presence of animals can make all the difference in the world. Just as Bolt saved Ethan, animals around us often offer protection and care in ways we may not fully comprehend.